I want to actually talk about the Hebrew word teshuvah. First of all, in the Bible, the word teshuvah, which we use as the term penitence, is really not used at an interpersonal level. It almost always is used for the people returning to the divine. The Hebrew word is lashuv, to turn, lahashiv, to call someone else to turn, and teshuvah is a noun form meaning turning. It's used as penitence, but I really think this is one of those words that we ought to remember its original form, which means to turn. Now, it's memorialized in our daily prayer. So I have the daily prayer book out in front of me on my Safari app on my iPad, which is really wonderful. I can go from text to text. And I want you to know that the so-called Teshuvah prayer is the second of the middle 13 prayers of the Amidah. So the Amidah has 19 prayers on weekdays, 7 on Shabbat and holidays. The first 3 and the last 3 are always the same. On weekdays, there's a middle 13, and Shabbat, there's one unit called the Shabbat prayers. So unless you're a very traditional Jew, you probably don't read the middle 19 blessings, but I strongly recommend it. I'll tell you what my practice is, by the way. Um, when I was younger, I would daven the entire service every morning, and it got to the point where I was just doing it because I was supposed to, like that whole mitzvah idea. And then I reduced it, and here's what I do now. There are basically 7 parts of the morning service. So every day I do a different part. So on Sunday I do Birkot HaShachar. On Monday I do Pesukei de Zimra. On Tuesday I do Shema V'chotea. On Wednesday I do the Amidah. On Thursday I do the Torah reading and other parts. And Fridays I do the Siyum, the end, and then on Shabbat I include the Shabbat prayers. So in a given week, I read the entire Shabbat morning service. I love it. It's beautiful, but it's not a good meditative device for me. There's so much that I ultimately get distracted. So the first of the 13 middle prayers goes like this. Atah chonen la'adam da'at. You graciously bestow upon the human being da'at, which is knowledge, umelamed le'enosh binah, and teach to the human being binah, or discernment. Then it goes on, chonenu me'itcha, graciously grant us from you, de'ah, knowledge, binah, discernment, v'haskel, enlightenment. Baruch atah Adonai, you're the source of blessing, Adonai, chonen hadat, the gracious bestower of knowledge. The Teshuvah prayer comes next. Now, why do I want to quote to you the chonen hadat, the gracious bestower of knowledge first? Because that's what we're returning toward. So the Teshuvah prayer is when we are no longer, as it were, in that moment of De'ah, Bina, V'Haskel, knowledge, discernment, and understanding, which according to the prayer book are gracious gifts from the divine. So here's the Teshuvah prayer in the daily prayer book. Hashivenu avinu l'Toratecha, turn us, our Father, toward your Torah. V'karvenu malkenu l'ovatecha, and bring us close, our sovereign, to your divine service. V'hachazirenu b'teshuvah shlema lefanecha, and turn us completely around in returning, in teshuvah shlema, in whole returning before you. Baruch atah Adonai, you are the source of blessing, Adonai, harotzeh b'teshuvah, the one who desires teshuvah. Now, of course, the teshuvah here does not really mean penitence, in the sense of penitence for a sin or transgression, nor does it specifically mean the teshuvah between people trying to reconcile, but it means teshuvah to Torah. Now, we have to remember that the word Torah itself does not mean the 5 books of Moses. It refers to the 5 books of Moses, but Torah simply means teaching, from the Hebrew word lahorot, which means to teach or instruct. So that's why I like to translate it, Hashivenu avinu l'Toratecha, turn us or return us, O God, to your teaching. Now, what's the divine teaching? This is a very hard thing to define, because I think on one hand, when I think of the so-called perennial philosophy of Aldous Huxley and so forth, there's a perennial teaching in every culture, in every time, that the spiritual, the moral, the enlightened people know is expressed in many different languages, in many different ways, in different religious traditions. But there are people, when they study a tradition, they find that aspect of the tradition that takes them to their souls, that brings to honor, integrity, spiritual enlightenment, love of humanity, love of values, and so forth. And as I, study one religion or another, I certainly gravitate to that the constant philosophy, the constant wisdom that undergirds. Clearly, I'm coming from my own value system, undergirds all philosophies and value systems in this specific kind of teaching. So when it says Hashivenu Avinu Letoratecha, return us, divine parent, to your teaching, it makes me think for a moment that when we say Torah, we mean the Jewish version or the Jewish articulation of the divine teaching, because I believe that all religions and faith systems and philosophic systems, rightfully practiced, are expressions of this divine teaching. So what this tells us is, and I think one thing that characterizes all of you who attend our gatherings on Shabbat and other times is, if we look for a common denominator, it's probably that we are all devoted to the teaching. We're all, in some way or another, successfully or not, disciples of the teaching. And so this prayer is for when you realize, I've walked away from the teaching. I used to think about the teaching day and night. I read poems, I read books, I was connected, I was developing myself, and I got off track and I woke up and I said, where am I? I've lost my focus. I've lost my purpose. Hashivenu Avinu Latoratecha. Return us, I'll say our teacher, to your teaching. So when you think of teshuvah, I will be talking today about teshuvah as in turning toward the divine, and teshuvah as in reconciliation between people. But I want to start off by reminding you that the meaning of teshuvah, which I think is most beautifully articulated in the traditional prayer book, is Hashivenu Avinu Letoratecha. Turn us, the divine teacher, to the divine teaching. Okay. And if you've never heard of the term the perennial philosophy, go ahead and look it up. It's something that I think all spiritual people from all traditions, I believe the term was made famous by Aldous Huxley. And there's a certain time when people understood there's something that unites, you might say, the good, the enlightened people of all faiths.